My name is Claire Donovan. I was 33 years old the morning my father stood in my kitchen and told me I had 1 week to sign my own house back over to him. Every board I had sanded by hand. Every wall I had opened, cleaned, rebuilt, and closed again. Every dollar I had bled into that property while everyone in my family called it a joke. My older brother Brett had gone through $1 million apartment in Manhattan the way other people go through a tank of gas, fast, careless, and without once looking at the gauge. Now he wanted what was mine. The old farmhouse upstate, the one my father handed me at a dinner table, like a consolation prize. The one my whole family nicknamed the shack. What none of them knew was what that shack had become. What none of them knew was what my mother had done, 19 years before she died, to make absolutely sure that no one could ever take it from me. And what happened the morning they pulled into my driveway with a rental truck and a stack of flattened moving boxes. That's the part I still think about before I fall asleep. Welcome to her side of the story, for every woman who held it together, alone. If you've ever been the one your family overlooked, the one nobody showed up for, stick with me. This one's for you. And if it hits close to home, tell me in the comments, and hit subscribe before we start, because you're going to want to see how this one ends. My mother's name was Eleanor. She died of ovarian cancer when I was 11 years old. She fought it for a year and a half, and she fought it the way she did everything, quietly, stubbornly, without ever once asking anyone for help. My brother Brett was 14 when she passed, old enough to remember her voice clearly, old enough to become the son my father leaned on for everything afterward. They grieved together, in their own way, baseball games, weekend fishing trips, silence in a truck cab that somehow still felt like closeness. I grieved by myself. I was the kid who packed her own lunch, who caught the early bus, who brought home report cards nobody looked at, because nobody was checking anymore. 3 years after my mother died, my father married a woman named Diane. She was 56, sharp blonde highlights, a voice that always sounded like she was about to hand you a compliment, and a knife in the same sentence. She rearranged our living room in her first 2 weeks in that house. By the end of the first month, she had rearranged the whole family. Brett was the future, that much was clear from the start. He played baseball, and my father never missed a game. Diane kept a photo album just for him. I built a scale model of a lighthouse for my school's design fair. Nobody came. Diane had a talent for making the neglect sound like a virtue. Claire's so independent, she'd tell people, smiling like she'd just paid me a great compliment. She really doesn't need us hovering. What she meant was that I wasn't worth the trouble. I never argued the point. I just filed it away, the way you keep a receipt for something you suspect you'll need to return later. There's one thing from that whole stretch of my childhood I never let go of. A sentence my mother said to me the last time I sat with her in the hospital, when her voice had gone thin as paper. She squeezed my hand and said, "I took care of something for you, Claire. You'll find it when you're ready." I had no idea what she meant. Not then. It would take 19 years for that sentence to make sense. Fast forward to last spring. My father decided it was time to divide up what he had while he was still around to watch us fight over it. He called it estate planning. Diane called it being sensible. I called it a dinner I should have skipped. We sat around the dining table at my father's house in Westchester, the same table my mother had picked out back in the 90s. Though Diane had long since replaced the chairs around it. Brett brought his girlfriend Megan, a physical therapist 26 years old who'd been dating him for about 5 months and already had opinions about the family. My father stood at the head of the table and cleared his throat in the tone he always used when he wanted to sound like a man announcing a merger instead of a retired insurance executive handing out furniture. "Brett," he said, "you're getting the apartment on East 81st, 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, appraised around $1.35 million. Brett grinned. Megan gripped his arm like she'd just won something. Diane watched with the satisfaction of a woman who had planned every word of that sentence herself. "Claire," my father paused just long enough to make it feel intentional. "You're getting a property I own upstate. A house on 6 acres, out past Ashford Hollow. No photos, no description, no number attached to it at all." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old brass key, tarnished nearly black, the long kind with a double bit end, So light in my palm it felt almost hollow. Brett laughed before I'd even closed my fingers around it. Ashford Hollow? Seriously, Dad? Diane dabbed her napkin at the corner of her mouth. It's very peaceful up there, rustic. My father looked at me the way you look at someone you expect to say thank you for a favor you never actually did them. Your brother needs it more, he said. I closed my hand around the key. It was still warm from his pocket. Thank you, Dad, I said. And I meant it, though not for any reason he would have understood. I drove up to Ashford Hollow the following weekend, alone, windows cracked, the air already sharp with the first bite of October. The house sat at the end of a dirt road, a quarter-mile past the last mailbox. 6 acres of overgrown field, ringed by birch trees that had already dropped half their leaves. Behind it, a low ridge of hills rose up gray and green. The house itself looked like it had been holding its breath for 30 years, waiting for someone to let it exhale. The roofline dipped on one side. Half the porch railing was gone. The front door stuck in its frame and gave way with a groan, like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Inside, no working heat, pipes frozen behind the walls, a smell of mildew and mouse droppings, floorboards soft enough to feel your weight sink through them. But the bones? The bones were something else entirely. A stone foundation laid sometime before 1900, hand-hewn oak beams running the length of the ceiling. A fieldstone fireplace wide enough to walk into. And outside, 6 acres rolling toward a creek that ran clear over smooth stones. With a view of those hills that made something in my chest go tight and quiet. I called my best friend Jenna that same night. She runs her own construction crew out of Burlington, about 40 minutes away. You need to come see this place, I told her. That evening, Brett posted in the family group chat. Did anyone see Dad's little upstate cabin? Claire's gonna love her new shack. He added a laughing emoji. Diane reacted with a little ha. My father said nothing at all. I screenshotted it and didn't reply. Because here's the thing, none of them understood about me. I'm an architect. Historic restoration is my specialty. And I wasn't standing in a joke. I was standing in a blueprint waiting to be drawn. Back home, I did what I always do when the world hands me something broken. I started making a plan. Zoning codes. Historic tax credits. Vermont commercial use requirements. I pulled comparable properties within an hour's drive that had been converted into inns or wedding venues. The math worked. It worked well. But before any of that, I made one phone call. Barbara Whitfield was 74 years old. She'd been my mother's college roommate at Wellesley, and later, her estate attorney. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 7 years. The last time was at a cousin's wedding, when she'd held both my hands and said, "When the time comes, you call me." So I called. "Ms. Whitfield," I said, "my mother mentioned once that she'd left me something. I just inherited a property upstate. Is there anything I should know?" There was a long pause on the line, the kind that has weight to it. "Claire," she said, her voice dropping half an octave, "I've been waiting for this call for a very long time. Can you come see me?" We set a date for the following week. She lived outside Camden, Maine, in a white clapboard cottage with green shutters. The kind of house that whispers instead of shouts. She had the door open before I'd even knocked. "Sit down," she said. "I'm going to tell you something your mother made me promise to keep until you were ready to hear it." We sat at her kitchen table while she poured tea without asking if I wanted any, then set a manila folder between us and opened it. "Your mother bought the Ashford Hollow property in the summer of 2005, 6 months before her diagnosis. She paid $58,000, cash, from the life insurance payout she received when your grandmother Vivian passed the year before. She bought it entirely with her own separate funds. Not $1 of it ever touched a joint account with your father." I stared at her. "She set up an irrevocable trust the same summer. The house and the land were placed in trust for you, Claire, to mature on your 31st birthday. You've been the sole legal owner for almost a year now, and you didn't even know it." My hands weren't steady. "Does my father know any of this?" "No," she said, "and there's more." She slid over a second document. "During the divorce settlement in 2007, your father signed a quitclaim deed relinquishing any claim to property held in your mother's name. He signed it. It's notarized. I doubt he remembers doing it. I sat with that for a long moment. Why didn't she just tell me? Barbara smiled, sad and proud in the same breath. She said you'd know exactly what to do with it when the time was right. Then she handed me a sealed cream-colored envelope with my name written across the front in my mother's handwriting. She asked me to give this to you when you were ready. I think you're ready now. I drove home with that envelope sitting on the passenger seat like it was something alive. If you've ever been handed the short end of the stick and quietly turned it into something nobody saw coming, you already know exactly how that felt. Stay with me, because what happens next is the part I wish I could tell every person who's ever been counted out too early. I didn't open the envelope that night. I set it against the lamp on my nightstand and looked at it the way you look at a door you're not quite ready to walk through yet. Meanwhile, Brett was living exactly the life my father's money had built for him. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a terrace with a skyline view, marble in the bathroom, and HOA fees north of $2,000 a month, which he described to anyone who'd listen as the cost of doing it right. He quit his sales job 2 weeks after moving in and told our father he was going to trade full-time. What that actually meant was that he sat at his kitchen island in his underwear, running borrowed money through 3 monitors, while Megan posted their life to 11,000 followers. I didn't follow either of them. I didn't need to. Jenna kept me updated anyway. Then my father called. "How's the old place?" he asked, casual, like he was asking about the weather. "It's fine," I said. "You know, if it's too much for you, we could sell it, split the money. Might be the smarter move." Translation: he wanted the land value freed up for whatever came next with Brett. "I'm keeping it, Dad." Silence on the line, the kind that meant he hadn't expected that answer. Diane texted me 20 minutes later. "Don't be difficult, honey. Your father's only trying to help." I read it once, set my phone face down on the counter, and opened my laptop instead. I built a spreadsheet: renovation costs, timeline, projected revenue, break-even point. I didn't text her back. Some messages don't deserve a reply. They deserve a business plan. I took a 3-month leave from my firm that winter. I packed my car with work boots, thermal layers, and the drafts I'd been sketching since the fall, and I drove north. Jenna met me at the property with her truck, a crew of 4, and an expression that was somewhere between thrilled and terrified. "This is either the best thing you'll ever do," she said, looking up at the sagging roofline, "or the most expensive mistake in the state of Vermont." We laid 12 sheets of blueprint across the bare living room floor that first morning. Structural reinforcement, a new standing seam roof, the fireplace restored stone by stone. 3 bedrooms in the old barn converted into 11 guest rooms. A farm table kitchen, a garden running down toward the creek. The budget came to just over $380,000. I had $90,000 in savings. An SBA loan covered $240,000. Jenna put in $50,000 of her own as a silent partner, because she said she'd rather bet on me than on her own retirement fund. I didn't tell my family a word of it. The first week, we stripped the interior down to the studs. Underneath water-damaged drywall, we found the original oak frame, hand-hewn still as solid as the day it was cut 120 years earlier. Underneath a curl of peeling wallpaper in the upstairs hallway, I found something else, a small pencil sketch of a house, and beneath it, in handwriting I would have known anywhere, a single word: someday. My mother had stood in that exact hallway once. She had pressed a pencil to that wall and drawn what she hoped it would become. I ran my thumb across it and left it exactly where it was. The mockery didn't stop. It got worse. Brett posted a photo from his terrace, the skyline behind him, a drink in his hand, captioned, "Some people renovate shacks. I'm renovating my portfolio." He tagged me. Jenna saw it first and offered, only half joking, to run his account over with a backhoe. Diane called one evening while I was hand sanding the porch railing. "Your father's worried you're throwing money away out there, Claire. Why don't you just sell and put it towards something practical?" What she meant, of course, was toward Brett. Around month 6, the outside was unrecognizable. New roof, the stone walls repointed by a mason Jenna found in Rutland who'd worked on 3 covered bridges in his career. The porch rebuilt from reclaimed barnwood. A garden that was already sending up rows of lavender and thyme along the path down to the water. The town started showing up on its own. A dairy farmer named Hank offered us cream and butter at wholesale. A potter named Dot, who ran a small studio in town, made a full set of dishware for the kitchen at no charge, just because she wanted to be part of something coming back to life. An artist named Gus painted a mural of the ridge in the lobby. Same reason. Meanwhile, in the city, the opposite was happening. Brett's trading losses hit close to $50,000. A surprise assessment on the building came due. Another $6,000 he didn't have. Megan moved out and left a note on the counter that said, "I didn't sign up for broke." My father sent Brett more money. I didn't find out from Brett. I found out from my cousin Lauren, at a birthday dinner, who mentioned it assuming I already knew. I hadn't. Then my father called and asked me to lend Brett money just to get him through a rough patch. "No, Dad." Silence. Then, "You've gotten so selfish, Claire. After everything this family's done for you." I hung up. I looked at the envelope still propped on my nightstand. I looked at my laptop instead, and I opened that. I typed until 3 in the morning, not out of anger, but because for the first time in a long time, I was completely sure of what I was building. Welcome to her side of the story. If you're just finding us, for every woman who held it together, alone. If this story's already reminding you of someone in your own life, drop a comment and let me know, and make sure you're subscribed. Because the letter my mother left me is coming up next, and it changes everything. One evening that winter, 9 months into the renovation, I sat alone in the half-finished living room. The fireplace was working again. Jenna and I had rebuilt the flue ourselves. 3 days of soot and swearing. I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. My mother's handwriting, small and careful, leaning slightly to the right the way mine still does. "My darling Claire, if you're reading this, then Barbara kept her word, and you found your way to Ashford Hollow. I bought this house the summer I turned 39, the same summer the doctors told me I had maybe 2 years left. I could have spent that money on another round of treatment. I chose not to. I wanted to leave you something no one could ever take away from you. Not your father, not anyone. This house is built on old stone, Claire. Like you. People will walk right past it and call it nothing much to look at. But stone doesn't need to be admired to hold a house up. It just has to hold. Remember that." She signed it simply. "Mom." I sat on that bare floor and cried, the kind of cry that doesn't make any noise, that just empties out of you until there's nothing left but the frame underneath. Jenna found me 20 minutes later, sat down beside me without asking a single question, and just held my hand until the fire burned low. By month 10, the inside was nearly done. 11 guest rooms, each one built around a different piece of the landscape. The birch room, the ridge room, the creek room. Handmade quilts sourced from a weaver's collective 2 towns over. Hand-forged iron hardware on every door. Floors sanded and oiled until they glowed like honey in the afternoon light. The kitchen was the part I was proudest of. A walk-in pantry stocked with preserves I'd made myself that summer. A partnership with Hank's Dairy twice a week. A garden already producing more than we could use. I named it Fieldstone House, after my mother's letter. A local food writer stayed a night in October, walked the garden at dawn, and published a review that started something. Bookings trickled in, then poured in. A regional lifestyle magazine reached out about a feature. I said yes. Then, on a quiet Sunday, I posted a single photo to my personal account, the house at sunset. Warm light in every window, no caption, no filter. 800 likes by morning. People I hadn't heard from in a decade. And, at 11 that night, a comment from my father's account, which Diane managed. "Nice, call me." I didn't. 3 days later, something happened that changed everything. We were finishing the primary suite, the last room left, upstairs with the bay window looking out over the creek. The stone wall behind the headboard sounded hollow when Jenna tapped it. We opened it carefully. Behind the plaster, tucked into a gap between 2 stones, sat a small cedar box, dark with age, sealed shut with a thin ribbon of old wax. I broke the seal myself. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of blue cloth, were 3 things. A second brass key, identical to the one my father had handed me at that dinner table. Except this one had been kept, polished, cared for. Beneath it, a note in my mother's hand, for the front door. The original one, "Love, Mom," and beneath that, a photocopy of the trust document, highlighted in yellow, annotated in her own handwriting and the margins filed with the county clerk. Walter signed the quitclaim, see page 9. Claire turns 31 in the fall. My mother had stood inside those unfinished walls nearly 2 decades earlier, knowing that one day I would tear them open, and she had left something there for me to find exactly when I needed it most. I held both keys in my palm, the one my father had handed me like a joke, tarnished and light, and the one my mother had hidden for me, polished and waiting. 2 keys, 1 house, and only one of them had ever been given with love. It took exactly 4 days for the phone to ring. "Claire," my father said, his voice tighter than usual. "I saw the post. That doesn't look like the same house." "It isn't. How much did you put into it? You didn't take out a loan against the property, did you? Because technically, I gave you that place." "And technically what, Dad?" He stammered, an actual stammer, a sound I had never once heard out of him in 33 years. "I want to come see it," he said finally. "The grand opening's in the spring. You're welcome to book a room." I hung up before he could answer that one. Diane called 20 minutes later, the syrup back in her voice. "Your father is very hurt, Claire. He just wants to be included. He wasn't included in the work. He doesn't get to be included in the result. That's not fair. He gave me what he thought was worthless. I made it worth something. Those aren't the same thing." Silence. Then the line I'd been hearing my whole life. "You know how it is. Your brother needs it more." I hung up and sat on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the ridge. I already knew what was coming. I could feel it the way you feel whether 2 valleys away. The tipping point wasn't mine, it was Jenna's. She filmed a slow walkthrough of the finished property for her own portfolio and posted it, not realizing my old blueprints were sitting open on the reception desk in one frame. The whole scope of the project laid out in ink for anyone paying attention. Brett watched it 4 times. He called our father that same night, voice climbing. "Dad, do you see this? She turned that dump into a resort. That place has to be worth 3-4 million. And then, in a rare and spectacular mistake, Brett accidentally sent a voice memo to the family group chat instead of to our father alone. I heard every word of it. "Dad, I gave her that property. That means it's still family property. We should be part of this." Then Diane's voice in the background. "That property was his to give, which means it's his to take back." I listened to it once, saved it, and called Barbara. "It's starting," I said. "I know," she said. "I've been expecting this for years. I'm ready when you are." Spring came. The house was fully booked through the following September. 8 employees, all local, a waiting list building by the week. Then a regional design magazine called, not the local paper, an actual national outlet wanting to feature the property as a full spread. An architect turning an abandoned farmhouse into one of the most sought-after retreats in New England. The story ran on a Thursday. 200,000 views in 2 days. The waitlist jumped to over a year. An appraisal came back at $4.1 million. Land, structure, and business combined. I told no one in my family. I'd learned that good news, once shared, has a way of becoming something someone else tries to take. Brett called that Friday. "So you're basically rich now," he said, doing math in his head I could practically hear. "I own a business. Brett, Dad wants a family meeting." I closed my eyes. About what? About what's fair? That word, coming out of his mouth, tasted like rust. Fair was $1 million apartment for him and a house with frozen pipes for me. Fair was every baseball game attended and every design showcase skipped. Fair was Diane whispering that I was independent, while quietly funneling my father's retirement into Brett's overdraft. "Saturday," he said. "Dad's house fine." That Saturday, I sat at the head of nothing, on the opposite end of my father's table from the 3 of them. "We're all very proud of what you've done," my father started. "Thank you. But," Diane leaned in, "the improvements are wonderful. But the underlying property is still a family asset. It isn't. Brett jumped in with his pitch. He'd run the business side. I'd handle design and food, 50-50. I looked at my brother, 36 years old, unshaven, wearing a watch he could no longer afford to have serviced. You want half of a business you had nothing to do with. I'd bring a lot to the table. What table? You've never run anything except into the ground. My father slammed his palm flat on the table. We're family, Claire. Be reasonable. I stood up. You gave me a house you thought was worthless. Now that it's worth something, you want it back. That's not family. That's a transaction. I left before anyone could stop me. In the car, a text arrived from my father. This isn't over. The foreclosure notice on Brett's apartment landed on a Monday. 90 days to resolve $71,000 in back fees, and a personal loan taken against equity he didn't fully own, since my father had kept the deed in his own name from the start as a safety net. My father didn't have $71,000 left to give. Diane's savings were locked in an annuity that wouldn't mature for years. So Diane came up with a plan of her own. The Ashford Hollow property was the answer. If only Claire would cooperate. The call came on a Tuesday night, close to 11. Claire, my father said, and this time his voice was different, lower, tired. The voice of a man sitting alone in a dark room, finally calling the daughter he'd spent 20 years looking past. Your mother was always the smart one. I know I wasn't good at the fair part. I let the silence stretch. Because silence is sometimes the kindest thing you can offer someone trying, badly, to be honest. But your brother's drowning, Claire. He's my son. I'm asking you, as his father, to help him. I'd help Brett, I said, but not by handing over what I built. That's not what I'm asking. Yes, it is. Another silence, longer this time. Then, the softness left his voice completely, and the old pattern clicked back into place like a needle finding its groove. That property was supposed to be nothing, Claire. A shack and a field. You were supposed to sell it and move on. You gave me what you thought I deserved. I turned it into what I actually deserve. He had no answer for that, so he reached for the only sentence he'd ever really had. Your brother needs it more. I heard it clearly, the refrain of my entire life, spoken like it was scripture. Good night, Dad. I hung up. The next morning, he called again, this time with Diane audible in the background. I'm going to make this simple, he said. You have 1 week to sign the property back to me. I'll compensate you fairly for the renovation. We'll get it appraised and I'll pay out what the improvements are worth. But the land comes back to this family. The land and the house, I repeated slowly. Brett will run the business, Diane added. He has management experience. Brett has an Instagram account that's disrespectful. That's accurate. My father's voice hardened. 1 week, Claire. If you don't cooperate, we'll pursue legal options. I gave you that property. I have every right to take it back. I looked out at the garden, the lavender, the creek catching the morning light. My garden, my creek. No, Dad, you can't. We'll see about that. The line went dead. I called Barbara. It's happening. I know, she said. The documents have been ready for years. I'll have everything couriered to you by tomorrow. I hung up and looked at the calendar. 1 week, the clock had started. What they didn't know was that I'd been counting down for 19 years already. The package arrived Thursday morning. The original irrevocable trust, notarized, 19 years old, and airtight. The certified quitclaim deed my father had signed in 2007. The county filing records. The $4.1 million appraisal. The SBA loan, issued solely in my name, secured against a property that was solely mine. Every renovation invoice. Every tax filing, every business license. I rolled my original blueprints and tucked them under one arm. Jenna offered to come with me. I told her no, this one I needed to do alone. They arrived Saturday morning at 8, a white pickup turning slowly off the county road like it wasn't sure of the address. My father drove. Brett sat beside him. Diane sat in the back next to a stack of flattened moving boxes. They'd brought boxes. Actual cardboard, actual tape, a hand truck. They'd come to pack up my life. Brett got out first, in khakis and a polo like he was headed to a job interview. and stopped dead when he looked up at the building. The last time he'd seen the place, it was a ruin from a group chat photo. Sagging walls, broken glass. Now, restored stone, glowing gold in the morning light. A new roof, a hand-carved sign reading Fieldstone House. Established. My father climbed out slower, older. Looking at the building the way you look at something you once threw away and suddenly want back. Diane stepped down, pushing her sunglasses onto her head. Well, she said, it certainly looks different. A pair of guests wheeled their bags out past them toward their car, waving at me on the porch. Thank you for an incredible stay, Claire. We already rebooked for the fall. My father watched them go in silence. I was sitting in the Adirondack chair I'd built myself. Cedar, wide enough to hold a coffee mug on the arm. I didn't stand. Have you brought the paperwork? My father asked. I have paperwork. Brett started for the front entrance. I held up a hand. That's a private business entrance. Guests only. I'm not a guest. I'm about to be running this place. No, you're not. My father's face reddened as he climbed the first step. Claire, enough. I gave you this property. I'm your father, and I'm telling you, Dad. Sit down. There's something you need to see. I laid the trust document on the porch table between us. This was executed in 2005 by Eleanor Donovan. My mother, your first wife. I looked at Diane when I said it. She didn't blink. It places this property and the 6 acres in trust for me, maturing on my 31st birthday. She bought it with her own money, a life insurance payout from Grandma Vivian. Not $1 of it was ever marital property. It was never yours to give, Dad. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I set down the second document. This is the quitclaim you signed during the divorce. You gave up any claim to property held in Mom's name. It's notarized. Your own attorney countersigned it. I don't remember signing that. Page 3. Your signature. 2007. Brett shoved off the railing. This is fake. You made this up. It's filed with the county clerk. It's public record. Call them yourself. Diane grabbed my father's arm. Ray, say something. He was staring at the trust, his fingers trembling against the edge of the page. Eleanor did this, he said quietly, like he was speaking to someone who wasn't there anymore. Yes, I said, she did. 19 years ago, I picked up the blueprints and held them like they weighed something. I built this from nothing. Every line on these pages is mine. Every dollar, every night, every board. I touched the second key at my collar, my mother's key, hidden in a wall she knew I would one day open. You said Brett needed it more. Dad, you were right. He did need more. But this was never yours to give him. The porch went quiet. A bird landed on the garden wall and started singing like nothing at all had happened. I think you should go, I said. Brett kicked an empty box off the porch steps and into the lavender. This isn't over. My father's own words, coming back out of my brother's mouth. Diane pulled out her phone. We're calling our lawyer right now. Have them call mine. Barbara Whitfield. She drafted the trust. She's been waiting 19 years for this conversation. Diane's face changed. She recognized the name. My father hadn't moved from the bench. He sat with his head down, hands on his knees, looking, for the first time in my life, genuinely old. Then he said, quiet enough that Brett and Diane almost missed it, your mother was always smarter than me. It was the closest thing to an apology he had in him. I didn't comfort him for it. You should go, Dad. There's nothing here for you to take. The truck backed out of the gravel drive with the empty boxes still stacked in the bed. I watched until the dust settled and the road went quiet again. 3 months later, the apartment was gone, the bank took it in the summer. And Brett moved back into his parents' guest room. The one with his old trophies still on the shelf. At 36 years old. My father and Diane downsized to a 2-bedroom condo not long after. Partly the market, partly the money that had already gone out the door. Brett took a job at a car dealership. His social media went quiet by fall. Diane sent me exactly one text. I hope you're happy. I read it and set the phone down. Some messages don't need an answer. They need the person who sent them to sit with their own silence for a while. The next year, Fieldstone House was named one of the Northeast's best boutique retreats by a regional travel outlet. Revenue for the year came in just under $800,000. I hired a general manager and went back to architecture part-time, taking on 2 restoration projects nearby. Drafting from the same desk, where I'd once cried over a letter from my mother. That fall, I hosted a weekend retreat I called Letters to Mom, for women who'd lost their mothers young. It sold out in a few hours. We wrote letters by the fire and read some of them out loud. Down by the creek, I placed a small stone marker, hand-carved by the same mason who'd repointed the walls. It reads, "For Eleanor, who saw a whole house in a pile of stone." 6 months after that morning on the porch, I wrote my father a letter, paper, not a text. Because some things need weight to carry them. Dad, I don't hate you. But I won't pretend the way you split this family was ever fair. You picked a side a long time ago, and you kept picking it, over and over, with money that wasn't always yours to spend. The door here is open to anyone who books a room. That includes you. It will never include anyone who walks through it expecting to take something that isn't theirs. I hope Brett finds his footing. I hope you find some peace. I found my foundation a long time ago. Mom made sure of it. I mailed it and didn't expect a reply, and I never got one. My cousin Lauren told me later that he read it once at his kitchen table, folded it back into the envelope, and put it in a drawer. Some letters aren't meant to start a conversation. They're meant to end a pattern for good. Here's what I learned. The people who count you out will always come back once you succeed, not to celebrate with you, but to collect from you. And the only thing you owe them, ever, is the truth. That you built it, that it was always yours, and that nobody gets to rewrite your story once you've already finished building the ending yourself. That's my story. A brass key, a cedar box, and a house that was never just a shack. If this reminded you of your own foundation, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below, and hit subscribe. This has been her side of the story for every woman who held it together, alone. I'll see you in the next one.